Pause for a second, don't keep scrolling. What unfolded last night isn't just another headline, it's the kind of moment that rattles the foundations of reality television itself. In Miami, under the cover of darkness, a single late-night encounter ignited a storm no one anticipated. By morning, fans were reeling, relationships were unraveling, and the internet was on fire. Reports claim Emjay Johnson was seen with Joseline Hernandez inside a secluded lounge, far from prying eyes, or so they thought. This wasn't a casual run-in. Those who witnessed the scene described an energy that couldn't be brushed off as friendly, hushed conversations, shared laughter, and a closeness that crossed invisible lines. When the first clip surfaced online, everything exploded. Viewers slowed the footage down frame by frame, scrutinizing every glance and movement. Social media quickly transformed into chaos, memes clashed with outrage, and speculation drowned out reason. While the spotlight burned hot elsewhere, Ballistic Beats, Joseline's wife, said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than words. The pain didn't need captions, it was evident in what wasn't said. Those images of Emjay and Joseline didn't just spark rumors, they shattered trust, turning what once looked solid into questions, betrayal, and open wounds. Then came the aftermath. Joseline appeared live on Instagram, visibly shaken, her voice unsteady as she acknowledged wrongdoing. She admitted to an emotional connection but stopped short of naming names. Emjay followed with his own response, a stark black and white post carrying a quiet confession. Sometimes even well-meaning people make devastating choices. Ballistic Beats answered in her own way, cutting ties digitally, unfollowing both, choosing self-preservation as the world dissected her heartbreak in real time. This isn't mindless chatter. Real lives are splintering, careers hang in the balance, and public images are cracking under pressure. Offers for tell-all specials and behind-the-scenes documentaries are already circling, but recovery can't be rushed. As Miami holds its breath, one truth stands firm: this chapter is nowhere near finished. Every hidden truth, every tear, every fracture is now woven into a story still unfolding. And if you think you've seen it all, think again. This saga forces uncomfortable questions about loyalty, love, and the real price of betrayal. What makes it even more unsettling is how quietly it began. Witnesses say Emjay arrived late at an after-hours lounge, slipping in without attention, no entourage, no spectacle, just the careful steps of someone hoping to go unnoticed. Not long after, Joseline walked in. Poised, confident, but visibly worn beneath the surface. When their eyes met, the air changed, not dramatically, not loudly, but enough for anyone watching to sense it. At first, fans clung to denial. Same city. Same industry. Same social circles. Coincidences happen. But bodies speak when words don't. And their body language told a story no one was ready to hear. Their closeness told the story before any words ever could. The way they sat shoulder to shoulder, the subtle lean in when they spoke, laughter that lingered just a beat too long, none of it felt accidental. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was familiarity, the kind that grows quietly over time, unnoticed until it's impossible to ignore. By the time a short, blurry clip surfaced online, the damage was already underway. 15 seconds. Grainy. Unclear. And yet, devastatingly clear. It was enough to make people pause mid-scroll. Enough to drain the air from the room. Enough to erase denial completely. Social media detonated. Comments flooded timelines faster than they could be read. Fans dissected every second, slowing the video down frame by frame, some desperate to confirm the truth, others clinging to the hope that there was another explanation. Amid all that noise, one presence vanished entirely. Ballistic Beats. Joseline's wife. No statements. No reactions. No digital breadcrumbs. Just silence. And that silence carried weight. Longtime followers felt it immediately, the kind of quiet that comes from someone absorbing betrayal in real time, trying to stay whole while the world watches from a distance. As night blurred into morning, rumors began piling up. Anonymous accounts whispered about more footage, longer clips, more private moments, things never meant for public eyes. No proof surfaced. No one shut it down either. That uncertainty spread fast, seeping into every conversation. Fans stopped watching passively and started searching, refreshing pages, hunting for clarity. Then came the insider murmurs. People close to the situation allegedly began speaking off-record. This, they said, wasn't the first late-night meeting. Emotional lines, they claimed, had been crossed long before anything physical. Smiles had been masking loneliness for months. Whether these claims were true almost didn't matter, the narrative had already formed. And once a story like that takes shape, it doesn't wait for facts to catch up. The pressure finally cracked. Hours later, Joseline went live. No makeup. No bravado. Just exhaustion etched into her face and a voice that trembled despite her effort to stay composed. She didn't deny everything. She didn't explain everything either. She called it a mistake. She called it human. She said comfort had blurred into confusion. And with that, something fractured for millions watching. Not long after, Emjay posted a single image. Black and white. A city skyline behind him. One short caption about good people making bad choices. Some read guilt between the lines. Others heard deflection. But nearly everyone agreed, it changed nothing. The damage was already done. Then Ballistic Beats made her move. Quietly. She unfollowed them both. No announcement. No warning. Just a silent boundary drawn. And that action hit harder than any public statement ever could. Because unfollowing isn't rage, it's distance. It's choosing self-protection when love has been cut too deeply to repair. As the story spread, consequences followed. Bookings became uncertain. Appearances were delayed without explanation. Behind the scenes, conversations shifted. Documentary offers. Exclusive interviews. Everyone wanted the story, but no one wanted to be the one blamed for telling it too soon. Fans split into camps. Some empathized with Joseline, seeing years of pressure and emotional exhaustion. Others stood firmly with Ballistic, calling the betrayal unforgivable. Many questioned Emjay, wondering how someone so guarded could risk everything for a moment destined to be exposed. By the end of the day, one truth stood undeniable: this was no longer gossip. It was a fracture, one that would ripple through relationships, marriages, and public images alike. And the most unsettling part wasn't what had already surfaced. It was what hadn't. Stories that begin in whispers rarely end quietly. That night in Miami wasn't a conclusion. It was an opening. The silence didn't last. It never does. Within hours of that quiet unfollow, the online atmosphere shifted, heavier, darker, impatient. People weren't speculating anymore. They were waiting. Waiting for the next reveal. The next truth to slip out of the shadows. Then the messages came. Anonymous DMs flooded gossip pages. Claims of longer footage. Claims of private clips showing more than closeness. Still no confirmations. Still no denials. Just enough detail to make stomachs turn. Enough to make hope feel naive. Enough to make denial feel like complicity. Ballistic Beats remained unseen, but insiders claimed the fallout was deafening behind closed doors. Phones left unanswered. Sleepless nights. Trust not just broken, but destroyed beyond repair. Friends described her as quiet, but not weak. Meanwhile, Joseline vanished completely. No posts. No lives. No comments. For someone known to be bold, loud, and unapologetic, the absence spoke volumes. And in that silence, the story continued to breathe, waiting for what would come next. The quiet that followed felt heavier than noise ever could. Fans who once celebrated her resilience began to wonder if that strength had finally buckled under years of emotional strain. Some rushed to her defense, insisting that relentless pressure reshapes even the strongest people. Others felt something closer to disappointment, arguing that pain, no matter how deep, doesn't justify choices that leave others broken in its wake. Emjay Johnson surfaced briefly, just long enough to be seen, and not long enough to be understood. Hood pulled low, eyes down, his posture tense as if the burden he carried had weighed en masse. He offered no words, no gestures of explanation or remorse. Only distance. From cameras. From questions. From the version of himself the public once trusted so easily. Sources whispered that guilt had settled into his daily life, that sleep came in fragments, that conversations with those closest to him were strained and sparse. But guilt alone cannot reverse damage. It can't erase screenshots, undo moments, or silence suspicion once it's been unleashed. Every step he took was recorded, replayed, examined. And with each day he chose silence, speculation filled the gap, slowly hardening uncertainty into something that felt uncomfortably close to fact. Then came the second surge, darker, more relentless. Screenshots flooded timelines with merciless speed, passed around by accounts that thrived on disorder. Alleged messages appeared, stitched together into a storyline suggesting this connection wasn't sudden or accidental. It was painted as something gradual, emotional, quietly growing over time. A bond formed in shared isolation, where feeling unseen turned into closeness, and closeness drifted into something reckless. Whether the messages were authentic, manipulated, misunderstood, or entirely false became almost irrelevant. The narrative had taken on a life of its own, and once the internet decides who you are, your explanation often arrives too late. Supporters transformed into detectives overnight. Those who once defended him without hesitation began combing through his past with surgical precision. Timelines were reconstructed. Old footage revisited, not for nostalgia but for clues. Pauses were overanalyzed. Jokes were reframed as signals. Harmless interactions were recast as evidence. Comments once ignored were unearthed, stripped of context, and repurposed to fit a growing theory. Glances became suspicious. Smiles felt calculated. Even kindness was reinterpreted as strategy. Unanswerable questions spread like wildfire. How long had this been happening? Who knew? Who suspected? Who chose silence? Each question multiplied into more, none grounded in certainty yet powerful enough to shape belief. Behind the scenes, tension escalated. Rumors of emergency meetings circulated. Filming schedules were reportedly adjusted. Entire storylines were said to be rewritten on the fly, as if the system itself was scrambling to control the fallout. Contracts were reviewed. PR teams worked non-stop, not to reveal the truth, but to decide which version of it would do the least damage. Everyone understood this was no ordinary controversy. It wasn't just about a lapse in judgment or a private mistake. It was a rupture in an image built carefully over years, through branding, interviews, curated vulnerability, and public ideals. The very traits that once defined him, loyalty, sincerity, integrity, were now under scrutiny. People began to wonder if any of it had been real, or if authenticity itself had been part of the performance. Trust doesn't break cleanly. It splinters, leaving edges sharp enough to wound long after the impact. And still, the most painful part was often reduced to a footnote in the media cycle: ballistic beats. Her name was everywhere, her voice almost nowhere. She didn't choose the headlines. She didn't release screenshots or shape the story that wrapped itself around her life without permission. Her composure became symbolic, something others projected meaning onto in their search for clarity. But symbols bleed too. Strength doesn't shield someone from fear, humiliation, or the quiet devastation of having your life debated by strangers who will never know the full truth. She was applauded for staying silent and criticized for it in equal measure. Speaking out risked accusations of manipulation. Staying quiet invited claims of secrecy. Every option was a trap. Every appearance, or absence, was interpreted through expectations she never agreed to carry. Support arrived tangled with cruelty. Empathy, when offered, often came with conditions, granted only if she fit the role the audience preferred. Emjay Johnson, meanwhile, faded into abstraction. More idea than person. His absence became its own spectacle. Some saw shame. Others saw arrogance. Others suspected strategy. Silence, again, became an empty space filled by assumption. Former admirers felt personally betrayed, as if something had been taken from them. Longtime skeptics felt validated. Even neutral observers were drawn in, because controversy exerts a pull that's hard to resist. As days stretched into weeks, the story refused to dissolve. New angles surfaced. Old allies stepped back. Carefully worded statements emerged, saying little while pretending to say enough. Terms like reflection, accountability, and privacy were polished and repeated until they felt hollow. Apologies were demanded before anyone could agree on what, exactly, needed apologizing for. Forgiveness was debated publicly, treated like something owed on demand rather than a deeply personal process. And through it all, the fracture remained, open, unresolved, and far more complicated than any headline could capture. The emotional fallout didn't stay contained, it spread. Families felt it. Friendships strained under suspicion. Even people loosely connected to the situation found themselves questioned simply because of proximity. Trust didn't just crack between individuals, it fractured entire circles that once felt bonded by shared admiration. The spectacle became draining, but it refused to slow, because outrage feeds itself. Each new rumor, each fresh angle, reopened the wound and kept it exposed. Away from screens and headlines, the truth was likely far less cinematic and far more painful. Real people were sitting with emotions that don't trend: regret, confusion, anger, fear. Feelings that linger long after attention shifts elsewhere. Moments replayed endlessly in their minds. Conversations imagined again and again, rewritten with words that came too late. Futures that once felt stable suddenly seemed fragile, uncertain, and out of reach. What couldn't be denied was that something permanent had occurred. Even if every claim were disproven, even if every message were clarified, the image would never fully reset. Public memory doesn't require certainty, it survives on repetition. And repetition had already reshaped perception beyond repair. At its core, this was no longer a question of guilt or innocence. It was about exposure. About what happens when private complexity collides with a public that craves clean answers. About how quickly empathy gives way to judgment, and how easily stories turn into cages. Emjay Johnson became a symbol of that collision, whether he chose it or not. And the woman caught at the center stood as a reminder that behind every scandal are lives that continue long after the headlines move on. Eventually, the silence broke, as it always does, but by then the damage had settled deep. Anything said afterward would be weighed not against truth, but against the version of events people had already accepted. And in that space, between reality and perception, is where the most lasting consequences live, unseen long after the noise fades. When she finally spoke, it wasn't dramatic. No explanations. No accusations. Just a dark screen and a single sentence about choosing peace over places that cause pain. That was enough. The internet erupted again. Support flooded in. So did cruelty. Some praised her strength. Others mocked her for trusting too deeply. But the truth was both simpler and heavier: she loved. And love exposes people in ways nothing else can. As night fell once more, it became painfully clear, this was no longer about a video. It was about loss. Loss of trust. Loss of safety. Loss of the life people thought they were living. Apologies rang hollow. Explanations felt incomplete. The future looked unstable for everyone involved, because when betrayal happens publicly, healing becomes a private war fought under a spotlight that never turns off. By the third night, the tone shifted. This no longer felt like spectacle, it felt like containment. The whispers hardened into warnings. Quiet screenshots circulated, claiming the full video existed and was being shared privately in closed circles. No links. No proof. Just enough fear to spark panic. Lawyers were reportedly contacted. Calls went unanswered. Blogs that had posted relentlessly suddenly went silent or erased content without explanation. That silence spoke volumes. It hinted at pressure. At consequences. At someone desperately trying to stop the fire before it consumed everything. Behind closed doors, sources claimed she had finally reached her limit. The strength shown publicly had demanded a private cost. Allegedly, she packed a bag, not in anger, not for drama, but quietly. The kind of leaving that happens when words are exhausted and staying hurts more than walking away. Friends said she needed space, to breathe, to grieve, to remember who she was before betrayal rewrote her reality. Joseline, meanwhile, was unraveling in her own way. Those close to her said regret arrived late and heavy. That what began as comfort spiraled into chaos faster than she could stop it. The guilt wasn't only about love, it was about reputation, legacy, and the realization that some mistakes outlive fame. Emjay Johnson disappeared completely. No sightings. No statements. No clarifications. Rumors suggested he was being advised to stay quiet, to let the storm burn itself out. But silence doesn't erase responsibility. It only leaves room for others to tell your story instead. Then came the darkest turn. An anonymous email sent to multiple gossip pages claimed the video had been recorded without consent, that someone else was present, that trust had been violated on more than one level. The claim couldn't be verified, but the impact was immediate. The narrative shifted from scandal to something far more disturbing. Debates exploded. Was this betrayal, or exploitation? Carelessness, or cruelty? Was everyone a victim, or was accountability still being avoided? No one agreed. Everyone had an opinion. And the internet did what it always does under emotional pressure: it chose sides and erased nuance. Production insiders reportedly paused filming indefinitely. Too volatile. Too raw. Too real. This was no longer storyline drama. It was personal collapse unfolding in real time. Careers teetered. Endorsements were questioned. Brand relationships came under review. Consequences were no longer theoretical. Late that night, she spoke again. Not with detail.